shows the inside of a studio with Phil Hartman sitting in a chair with a panel of people surrounding him. Hartman: "Hello, I'm Hill Fartman," and that's Fartman with a PH. "We are back with the second installment of SNL Obsessive Ombudsmen, where we ask a group of super fans their thoughts on last night's SNL episode. We're going to start with our panelist Johan Balucci, a semi-retired veteran of sketch comedy, having spent most of his career in the Somalian sketch comedy circuit, despite being a bit of a racist. Shows John Belushi sitting, who says, "Now I want to stress that now I am only a bit racist. The Somalians grew on me over time." Hartman: "Very good. So what did you think of the cold open?" Belushi: "Well, for starters, it was televised." Hartman: "For expediency's sake, we're going to ask that you refrain from haranguing the use of television and just analyze the merits of what you watched." Belushi: "Very well. There were two black performers in the cold open, which after my time in Somalia, I was able to stomach. There was also an Asian gentleman, but I was too young for Korea and too old for Vietnam, so that's okay. But what really kind of threw me for a loop was that there were two women. And I must say, Fartman, I think women are ruining the sketch comedy industry." Hartman: "Is that right?" Belushi: "Back in my day, Somalia in the early 1960s, we didn't allow women in our sketches, and it was a very special time and place to be a part of. Maybe it meant something, maybe not, but no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that you were there and alive in that corner of time in the world, early 1960s Somalia, and that you were there doing your part in preventing the advancement of Somalian women who wanted to perform in sketch comedy." Hartman: "Right. So anything to say about the cold open itself other than the racial and sexual makeup of the performers in the sketch?" Belushi: "Well, as you can probably guess from my time in Somalia, I didn't appreciate that Bowen Yang's character was named Morgan Freegirl. But I thought there were some good jokes about Biden, Super Mario, Kanye. I liked how they disrespected sobriety by having someone 15 years sober chug wine. But unfortunately, when they all yelled live from New York, Chloe Fineman was looking right at the camera. What is she doing? Stop looking at the camera." Hartman: "That's right. You don't like Chloe looking at the camera. Next, we're going to turn to Conrad Farthington, an empty video store clerk who has encyclopedic knowledge of In Living Color and a working man's knowledge of SNL. Welcome, Conrad." Shows Chris Farley sitting, who says, "Top of the morning to you, Fartsman." Hartman: "Well, how apropos that you would use an Irish accent, as I was going to ask you about Brendan Gleeson's monologue." Farley: "Well, first of all, it's not an Irish accent. I just used a whiny American accent last week. Anyway, I liked how Mr. Gleeson is an Irish fella. But what, Liam Neeson wasn't available?" Hartman: "Well, at least Colin Farrell made a cameo." Farley: "Well, that's all fine and good. But what, Pierce Brosnan wasn't available?" Hartman: "Well, what did you think of Brendan playing the mandolin?" Farley: I mean, a mandolin, sure. But what, no bagpipe was available?" But even though perhaps I'd like to have seen Liam Neeson playing the bagpipes with a Pierce Brosnan cameo, I thought Mr. Gleeson did a very fine job hosting. It was very well received by the few Irish people who had gotten off to a late enough start that they had not yet blacked out for the evening. I particularly liked later on him spraying blood all over Chloe Fineman in the Blood Oath sketch. Serves her right." Hartman: "This seems seems to be a running theme. Why all the picking on Chloe? Farley. Aye, she's too pretty for TV. I'd prefer an uglier woman. Hartman. Okay, she's too pretty for TV. Anyway, we're now going to turn to Janelle Hunter, a woman who has a tendency to bed SNL male cast members. Shows Jan Hook sitting, who says, "For the record, they haven't all been men. And Mr. Fartman, remember that I only agreed to do this if I was given the chance to promote amphibian rights." Hartman. That's right. Go ahead. Hooks. Amphibians, particularly biofluorescent ones, have been cast aside during this time of economic and social upheaval. Nearly 80% of all amphibians suffer from obesity, which has caused all sorts of body dysmorphia issues. I believe amphibians have the right to be free from obesity, and therefore more needs to be done by the Biden administration to cut off the amphibians' food supply. Hartman. Wow, I didn't know Miss Piggy was also a frog. Hooks. Really? That's really out of line to say that publicly? Jim Henson had tried to keep that secret for years. Are you like Julian Assange or something? Hartman. For God's sake, can we move on from amphibians, and could you tell us your thoughts on the first sketch after the monologue involving the Try Guys? Hooks. Well, this sketch was near and dear to my heart, as I, of course, slept with a few SNL cast members that led to their dismissal. Chris Redd being the most recent. But this particular sketch reminded me more of my affair with Kevin Nealon that got him booted. Hartman. Are you saying Chris Redd and Kevin Nealon were fired from SNL for having affairs with you, Miss Hunter? Hooks. Among many others. Remember the big shakeup, Farley and Sandler and all those guys left? It was because they gangbanged me. Hartman. That's right. I heard Don Ohlmeyer hates gangbangs. Norm MacDonald, seated next to Hook, says, "Well, don't forget me, you know. Why, O.J. Simpson jokes get all the credit. But the real reason I was canned is because I couldn't keep my hands off this random amphibian rights activist here. I didn't find out until much later that Lorne hates amphibians." Hartman. Anyway, Janelle, what did you think of the sketch? Hooks. I'll say the guys tried, as in it seemed like Bowen Yang and Andrew Dismukes were trying to make Mikey Day break. And though they came close, he managed to hold on. Don't worry, fellas, you're not alone. I haven't been able to wrangle him in yet myself. Hartman. Okay, and how about the 4 new cast members? Hooks. Yep, I fucked all 4 of them already. Hartman. No, I mean their pre-taped segment about how it's been going for them to start off. Hooks. Oh, right, yeah. That was funny. Molly trying to kill Putin was great. But if you think killing him is tough, try fucking him. Yikes. Anyway, they performed as well in the segment as they did at the gangbang, so I was very impressed. Hartman. Okay, and we have a very special guest to discuss the next sketch. Please welcome Marilyn Monroe. Applause, applause, applause. Marilyn Monroe is shown in the studio over a televised feed and says, "Hi, Mr. Fartman. Thanks for having me." Belushi. "Dal, what are you doing? Don't look at the camera." Monroe. "Really? What do you want me to do?" Belushi. "Just stop looking at the camera." Monroe turns her face to the side while over the feed and asks, "Is this better?" Belushi. "Yes, finally. Thank you." Hartman. "My apologies, Marilyn. I guess cameras weren't very popular in Somalia." Belushi. It was Zimbabwe? Hartman. No, I'm certain your backstory involves Somalia. Belushi. Are you out of your mind? I've never been to Somalia. Hartman. Anyway, Miss Monroe, thoughts on Chloe's performance? Monroe. Oh, I thought she did a perfect impression, and she looked beautiful. Farley. Which is the entire problem? Monroe. The whole sketch was very funny, even if Heidi was being a huge bitch. And in the next sketch, with Andrew Dismukes being a photographer, I thought Mr. Gleason looked like a natural, posing in front of the camera. It brought back many memories. Hartman. How about Colin Farrell? Monroe. He not so much. Hartman. Okay, Marilyn. Anything else? Monroe. I loved Willow's 2 performances. She was marvelous. Hartman. Okay, thank you for mentioning Willow, Marilyn. We were hesitant about asking our next panelist, Norm MacDonald, about her, as we understand he hates polyamory. Shows Norm MacDonald sitting, who says, I stand with mahogany. Hartman. So, Norm, what did you think of the Please Don't Destroy video with Gleason portraying a 67-year-old man pretending to be a high school senior? MacDonald. Well, before I get to that, I wanted to say that I really liked how Dismukes spoofed Back to the Future like he was calling Chuck Berry. Hartman. And why is that? MacDonald. Why is that? Why? I just love Back to the Future is all. Hartman. Okay, and the Please Don't Destroy video? MacDonald. Well, I thought it was great, It reminded me of my later years, when I would stumble into high school parties, pretending to be a high schooler. But when I did it, you see, I wasn't hanging out with other gents. I was getting lots of ass. Hartman. Are you serious? MacDonald. I sure am. I was getting lots of ass and bringing those very donkeys to the high school parties. Those donkeys were a real hoot with the kids there at those parties. Hartman. Okay, and how about Weekend Update? MacDonald. I was once on Weekend Update. Hartman. Uh-huh. MacDonald. Yeah. I'm no longer on there, though, as now I'm dead. Anyway, I like their joke about Dr. Oz killing 300 dogs and finally getting the recipe right by showing meatballs. Meatballs being made of dead dogs. Well, I say, ironically, that maybe those 300 ugly women would still be alive if they had eaten less meatballs. Hartman. First of all, the term dog in this instance was referring to canines. Secondly, the term dog, when not referring to canines, is most colloquially used to refer to promiscuous men, as opposed to ugly women. MacDonald. Well, gee, I know that, Hill. Hartman. But I figured that referring to promiscuous men as dogs would be considered slut-shaming. So I figured I'd go after ugly women instead. Hartman. Okay, anything else you'd like to add? MacDonald. Well, I loved Heidi as Ariel, but I was a little surprised that in 2022 that they'd resort to blackface. Hartman. That was Ego Wodum portraying Ariel, Norm. MacDonald. Really? Well, I'll say in hindsight then that actually makes a lot more sense. Anyway, that Hernandez fella, who was talking about the Latin ball players, you know? Hartman, you mean new cast member Marcelo Hernandez. McDonald, yeah, well, with the way he was talking and flailing around and everything, I was mighty impressed, you know? He really pulled the whole Hispanic angle off really well for a Jewish fella. Hartman, Marcelo Hernandez isn't Jewish, Norm. He's Latino. McDonald, Latino? With a name like Hernandez? Wow. I always thought Hernandez was a Jewish last name, like Goldman or Escobar. Hartman, okay, and Mr. Farthington did already touch upon blood splattering everywhere with the Blood Oath sketch, so we're going to turn to our next panelist, Gladys Randanowitz, a post-woke, post-feminist author of the serial nonfiction series Scissoring Venus Flytraps. Gladys, what did you think of the last sketch of the evening, Eyes, with Sarah Sherman? Shows Gilda Radner sitting, who says, well, I gotta say, that little firecracker Sarah had me squirming with those big, big eyes. And my God, that figure. Hartman, that figure? Radner, a star is born with that darling little figure. My own eyes bulged out seeing her fit into that spicy green top. Hartman, really? It was actually a rather modest top. Radner, are you blind? Open your eyes. That girl's figure is going places. I just hope that includes my place. Hartman, okay, we are running against the clock, but we also have Shantae Van Dam, an urban rights major studying at Tijuana Community College out of Portland, Maine. Shantae, any thoughts on the episode? Shows Denitra Vance sitting, who says, where my girl Punky be at? They throwing blackface onto Heidi Gada and they got no time for a black girl, huh? Hartman, again, that was Ego Wodum, who is African American. Vance, would you call me honky? Hartman, now, I didn't call you anything out loud that I recall. Anyway, besides wanting more Punky, any other thoughts? Vance, well, son, dead from the earth, we're not alive. It's Saturday Not Alive, starring John Belushi, Chris Farley, Bill Hartman, Jen Hooks, Norm MacDonald, Gilda Radner, Denitra Vance, and many other special deceased contributors. Musical guests, Barney McKenna, and your host, Greg Giraldo. Everybody, Greg Giraldo. Applause, applause, applause. Giraldo. Thank you, thank you. The producer wanted me to host, since there had not been a Hispanic host for Saturday Night Alive since Mikhail Gorbachev. The producer wants me to talk about my time as a lawyer, since he's a lawyer. However, I'd rather talk about Donald Trump grabbing Kamala Harris right by the pussy. The living people listening, they don't know how good they have it. Imagine being a comedian who missed out on Donald Trump being president. Any comedian worth their salt should have had 3 specials of material ready to go from that phrase alone, Donald Trump as president. What can you say about Trump other than he is supporting Herschel Walker for senator, even though he fired him on The Apprentice? I guess if she were alive, Trump would have Joan Rivers be his Secretary of State. I'm guessing Putin would capitulate if he had to hear her voice, and commit suicide if he had to see her face. But enough about me shitting on Joan Rivers. That's Johnny Carson's job. Like I said, the producer wanted me to talk about being a lawyer, So I got into law school by doing much better than the producer on the entrance exam. And when I say entrance exam, I'm not talking about a dutiful gynecologist, but a test you have to take, with like a pen. Anyway, I wasn't a lawyer for a very long time, but at one point I did represent Jeffrey Ross in a criminal case where Jeff was charged with inciting a riot because he tried to stop a guy at a comedy show who pulled out a toy gun. The prosecutors then upped the charges on Jeff when we were there in court by including weapons charges, even though the other guy brought in a toy gun. It was at that point I realized I shouldn't have clam-baked with Jeff on the way to court. So we had to come back a month later with another lawyer. But even though my family was disappointed I left the law, I always wanted to do something creative. I've always had real trouble knowing what my actual desires and goals are. I've just been dragged along by fate. I can't even tell you why I thought to go to law school. Because I went to Harvard Law School, it seemed like I had my shit together. But I did only because it's not hard. Everyone is so self-motivated that they leave you alone. You get study outlines and just cram, but then when you get out into the real world, it gets tricky. Most comedians aren't people who couldn't really work in the real world. They're too disorganized, too lazy, too fucked up, too erratic, too unstable. If you could work in the real world, you would have stayed there because it is so many years of misery and comedy before you really start popping. And when I say misery, for most comedians that means doing open mics and trying to get a paying gig. The producer here instead just spends hours putting words into dead comedians' mouths. Or in the case of Joan Rivers' mouth, dick. Joan Rivers comes out. Applause, applause, applause. Rivers. Okay, lawyer man, anything you want to say to my face? Giraldo. You call that a face? Rivers. My face lit up like a Christmas tree when I found out you OD'd right before you were going to perform at an addiction recovery rally. Giraldo. Ouch. Rivers. But I'll say, on touching your tombstone reads, beloved father, always loved, forever remembered. Giraldo. Thank you. Rivers. I have no idea why it's on your tombstone, but it's a great saying nonetheless. I'm kidding. You're great, Greg. Go get it. Giraldo. Thanks, you old hag. Anyway, we have a great show tonight. Doesn't that piss you off with this? That he makes us say we have a great show even though it's about to end? There is no great show coming up. It's actually right about to end. But I'm required to say anyway that Barney McKenna is here. So get ready for whiskey in a jar from a dirty old town. Just like those micks like it. We'll be right back.